Viewer discretion is advised.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the New to Wrestling podcast After Dark. This is going to be our unintended last part of the Chris Benoit story. So this was part three. It was originally going to be just two parts, but Kelsey came up with that with all that juicy information that we just had to we couldn't shut up, which is typically just a personality trait at this point. But we want to welcome you guys on board for the last part of this. And once again, we just want to reiterate that we are just two friends having a conversation about a pretty controversial topic. So viewer discretion is advised, and take or leave that as it will. All right, you guys enjoy the episode.
Yeah. So again, they talk about roid rage. Randazzo talks about how, he wasn't 6 feet tall. He really believes, like he wasn't like a big wrestler, so he believes like he was like just really juicing himself up with steroids, and we find out that he'd been taking steroids since he was in high school. And he had, during his autopsy, they found that he had 10 times the amount of testosterone in his body, like 10 times more than the average human body should have in his body.
Right.
So I found some tea on the testosterone because I was curious about this. Um, his doctor at the time was a man called Dr. Aston, and he was the one who supplied Chris with a 10-month supply of steroids every 3 months. So, yeah,
He was taking 10 months of steroids every 3 months.
basically triple the amount more than triple the amount of supplies. He also was supplying drugs of all kinds, muscle relaxants, painkillers, steroids to Johnny Grunge, who we know dies of a heart attack eventually from
Mm-hmm.
painkillers, they believe is the main cause, and Lex Luger, who we talked about on the Miss Elizabeth episode, which I
Right.
also found out that Nancy and Miss Elizabeth were very close.
Yeah,
And
they
when
worked
she,
together and when they were in WCW because when Nancy was like woman, like they were in the same circles. Like they yeah.
yeah, really crazy. So when she died, which was basically when Miss Elizabeth died, Nancy was bereft. She was so devastated. And it was also because of the drugs that Dr. Aston was supplying to Lex Luger, because they were just in like a whole drug den when she
Right.
overdosed and died. Um, he is eventually indicted and convicted. He serves, I think like 3 years. I have it somewhere in these notes, but he serves just a few years, and then he, weirdly enough, on the 10-year anniversary, I think it was, of the murders, dies of a heart attack.
Ooh,
Just randomly. The
okay.
doctor. Yeah, so the doctor, after they go through basically Chris's house, obviously, after the murders, and like find basically so many drugs that they didn't even document all of them because they said it would have taken too much time. And they literally wrote like small pharmacies worth of drugs found in this house. There were drugs found hidden in suitcases, walk-in closets, and actually Sandra found a lot of them when she moved into the house after the incident.
She
So
moved into the house.
yes, which is crazy. I didn't look too much into this because I didn't understand or figure out
Mm-hmm.
why she would do that. But yes, she moved into the house, and she was the one that found like a suitcase full of needles, testosterone, drugs in like a buried in a closet somewhere.
Jesus.
She also found like the notebooks and all these kinds of things. There was a lot that she found, but yeah, he had 10 times the amount of steroids in his body than a normal human being should have. And based on that number, they also believe that he had just taken testosterone extremely recently. Um, which also put a pin in that because I'll come back to that later with the phone call that
Okay.
happened with Nancy 3 days before the incident. Um, So there's text messages. They bring up text messages between Nancy, where she talks like you can see it. And I don't know if you guys are sick and heinous like me, but it was a whole sheet of text messages they posted on the show, but they
Mm-hmm.
only highlighted one. I naturally paused and read the rest.
Oh yeah.
There's a lot. So they highlighted the ones talking about steroid use, how they wanted her, she was saying, get off the shit. I don't deserve this abuse. We all know the WWE wellness program is a joke. Um, but other texts talk about how he was negligent towards his children, where she accuses him of ignoring all his children, intentionally not speaking to them, not caring for them. Yeah. And there is like some weird accusations that I found upon my internet searching. Again, this is all alleged, none of this has been proven, where he only had his kids, David and Megan, 2 times a year, like would just like fly them down, but then would have them in the house but not do anything with them. Like they just existed there. And she would be upset, like, why don't you plan anything with your kids? Why don't you do anything with them? Why don't you even take them anywhere?
Right.
There's one of the text messages was Daniel called you 3 times today. What, you don't even have time for him anymore? So it's interesting because you're getting all these reports of like he's an amazing father. He spends every spare moment with his kids possible, even from David himself. David's like, my dad loved me. He was an excellent father. He spent a lot of time with me all the time with me that he could.
I'm wondering
And
like if like when these are from.
same.
Because I'm wondering if this is like post Eddie or
This is a good point.
because we like Chris Jericho said like at some point during it, he's like, I think like Chris died the day like Eddie died. Like he just couldn't do it.
Right.
Uh so like I'm wondering if like his like self-isolation, negligence, whatever. If all of these messages are from like that time period, or if
This
this
is
was
also
like
true.
a long standing like he's always been like that and we just didn't know.
Right. So that I do not have the answers to, but that's a really good point. We don't know when these text messages occurred. We only know the content of them.
Right.
So that's very possible because, like Xavier said, we know that he was not in his body after Eddie died.
Hmm.
But I do want to talk about also, so the WWE wellness program is a joke. So, Chris was tested 4 times within the year before the murders, and they all came back negative, even though we know Dr. Aston was
Was
supplying
prescribing,
him
yeah.
with a hefty amount of drugs. And so there's speculation that he either found a way to cheat the test or because of his star power, because of who he was, the results were fudged intentionally
Hmm.
by the higher ups at the WWE. They also, I didn't know this, but the WWE refused to release the results of his prior wellness tests, like before that year, which were probably positive for steroids.
Right.
They only released the 4 times it came back negative, but his most recent test before the incident was like in April, and it was negative for
Right.
everything, allegedly. But after Eddie, Jericho says after Eddie, this is so we're getting this speculation of like maybe the wellness program is a joke. Nancy's texting saying we all know it's BS. We're
Hmm.
getting, Chris is clearly on prescription steroids, testosterone, all this stuff. But Jericho says that the wellness program after Eddie died was so strict you couldn't even take an aspirin without having a strict prescription and having it be like documented.
Right.
He's like, it was hardcore, so strict, but others, many others, including Randazzo, who wrote Ring of Hell, says there was a lot of blind spots, like wink,
Hmm.
wink, towards
Right.
certain talent.
I believe that.
I do too, to be totally honest with you. I really do. I do not put it past anybody to, if their top selling wrestler, top performer is coming back positive for steroids, they're going to be like, well, that's the end of the line for you. Like, that's just not happening,
Right.
in my
Right.
opinion.
Hmm.
So, again, we will never know, but the WWE very hardcore combats the accusations of roid rage, because They
They've
have
already
to.
done this. They like
They've already done this in 2000, the steroid trials.
right.
So they heavily combat this. Vince McMahon, I think too, this is really crazy. He goes on a news outlet, and I'm curious your thoughts about this because he basically, like, to combat the roid rage thing, says, like, if you look at the evidence, it feels like this is premeditated or that it was intentional. This isn't a person who had a blind rage and just did this. This seems like this person, like, intentionally did these things cognitively. It wasn't
Right.
like roid rage. But that's basically saying, like, okay, so you think Chris was capable of these things and you
Right.
have this sense. So it's really
And
interesting.
I think that's like so interesting in that at the same time that he's like trying to distance himself from it, he is like inadvertently like making it so it's like okay, so if this was like a premeditated thing, he was like in his right mind, that he like there were signs that he was like okay, sure,
Mm-hmm.
what were you doing about
Mm,
any of these signs? Or
right.
like if you believed that he was like capable of doing all of these things, and like you clearly knew from the last year that he was not the same, what were you doing like in the interim of all of this? So at the same time he's like, he's trying to like just like vehemently like oppose the steroid thing because they've already done this. They did the whole trial. They had the whole rigmarole, um, where both he personally and the company was sued. So he's like for sure going to deny
Of
steroid
course.
use
Mm-hmm.
across the board because the wellness program was made and put into place because of the steroid trials. Like
Mm-hmm.
they literally, it was a way of them being like, oh no, like we've got something in place now, like it won't happen again.
Mm-hmm.
So like while he's doing that, you're also being like, oh, like clearly this is like a which is like it's what it sounds like. It was a premeditated thing. So like in my eyes, he was just saving himself and throwing Chris further under the bus because he was already in the bus. You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean?
Mm-hmm.
It was just kind of like oh, like we can't have this. So this is he's already dead and gone. Like what difference does it make? Like
Right.
so but at the same time, it's like the thing where like two things can be true at the same time. He could be
Mm-hmm.
wanting to like deflect from his company and also believe that this was a premeditated thing because it seemingly so. Like it seems like it very much was a premeditated thing. So
Right. And like maybe not even premeditating the fact that like he planned it, but that he was aware of what was happening and did it intentionally.
right,
But I think it's interesting because he kind of like cuts off his nose to spite his face because like he's saying that no, the wellness program is sound, but if you're also affirming that it has some gaping holes because wellness shouldn't just be about like are you positive or negative for steroids? It's like he's clearly been grieving hardcore. There's paranoia, there's mental signs that something is amiss and he is not well. So if the wellness program is just saying like are you positive or negative for steroids, it's not necessarily like encompassing the wellness of
right,
the athletes. So it's weird because he's like no, the wellness program is sound, but you're also saying that like if he wasn't in his right state of mind even though he was cognitively aware of what he was doing, then you also failed with the wellness program regardless. Regardless, it's a failure in my opinion because it's like obviously
the wellness of the superstar was not
intact.
met. Right,
Yes. And the fact that he went on tour, and again, that was his own choice, but he went on tour directly after the funeral of his best friend. No one stopped him. Yes, it was his choice to go, but don't put him in matches. Be like, no, like you need time, you need
right.
whatever. But he was their superstar. Like
At
they
that
weren't
time,
going to
yeah.
say no. So it again, it's like, okay, like no, maybe you were correct that he wasn't positive for steroids, though we find out he was because of the autopsy. And like maybe it wasn't roid rage, but like you still are saying that like there's gaping holes in the wellness program. So it kind of is a joke regardless.
Right. And even if like you're gonna be like, no, like the wellness program like wasn't. It's just like you have blatant. How are you gonna fail or pass a like drug test 2 months prior and then all of a sudden have 10 times the amount of testosterone that you should have? You don't get that like you that is from years upon years upon years of using. Like that
Mm,
doesn't that amount of testosterone doesn't just show up in your body like from whatever a single use, or you know what I mean, or like the use in like the days like prior, like that is continued, that is a regiment of steroids, like that is,
yes.
so it's like you it was, we've all found out that there were like glaring holes as soon as the autopsy came out,
Yeah,
because it's just like
exactly.
how are you being like, no, it's solid 100. I was like, then why does he have 10 times the amount of testosterone in his body?
Right. So,
Right.
and I will say this interview came out. He was like, we just have to wait for the toxicology report. But it's like, you knew what it was gonna be. Like, I know you're not
What it was
dumb.
going to
I know
yield. Yeah.
we knew, like, and you knew, and I know that you knew, but whatever. We can talk about this until I'm blue in the face. But, um, so Jericho, now they get into kind of like the why this could have happened or if there was like other underlying things aside from this testosterone. So Jericho mentions that he was aware that Nancy and Chris kind of had a volatile relationship. He knew that they had fights, which this is it if you just watch part 1, wouldn't have known. Like
No.
this to me was surprising. And then of course when I was deep diving in the interwebs, like you find out more stuff. But this is news to me, girl. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
they're just saying how much in love they were, whatever. Obviously, nobody is perfect. Many things can be true at once. But Chris Jericho says that their relationship was very volatile. Jackie says Nancy had called her a few times and said they were fighting. And one time when they were on the way to their house, they got in such a bad fight that Chris broke the windshield of their car.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Sandra says there was an incident, and I believe this is the incident I was talking about before, where there was a divorce
Like a
filing and
separation.
a
Yeah.
separation. And apparently there were several separations over the course of the years that were kept like hush hush, like only a few
Mm-hmm.
people were the need to know. But Nancy called her and Johnny Grunge to the house. So, like I said, Johnny Grunge, who was also getting drugs from Dr. Aston, lived in the area and was apparently a great help to the Benoit family in terms of settling Chris when he was really in like a blind rage. So this is Sandra. Nancy called her and Johnny Grunge to the house. Chris had hurt Nancy. I don't know if it was intentional or accidental, but out of respect for his surviving children, I won't go further into that. But Nancy got a restraining order. Sandra moved into the house temporarily, but they were back together shortly after.
Right.
Like it didn't last. So I believe this is the same incident. Um, so I found in my search there was a phone call 3 days before the incident between Nancy and a woman named Pam Clark, who is the wife of Brian Hildebrand, who was a apparently very well-known figure as a referee in WWE, ECW. I don't know too much about him. I know that he also dies very tragically, I think from cancer.
I did not know
Um,
this.
yeah, very sad. Um, but apparently Nancy was good friends with his wife Pam. So just 3 days before the incident, she had called Pam in a 2-hour phone call, complained to her that the steroids had inhibited their sex life. And it was revealed in doctor's notes from Dr. Aston that Chris was in full testicular failure from the amount of
Steroids.
testosterone,
Yeah.
the amount of steroids. And actually, the testosterone was prescribed to him to try and combat that. Um, so he was taking a 10-month supply of steroids within 3 months because he was in full testicular failure and it was really inhibiting their intimate relations. She also, this is crazy, she also confided in Pam that she believed Chris was having an affair with a WWE diva. I dug a little deeper and
Which one?
allegedly Michelle McCool,
Michelle McCool,
Undertaker's
Taker's
wife.
wife.
This is
I
alleged.
mean, I'm
This
assuming
hasn't.
before he was
Yes.
like,
So
because
the
you're not gonna
timeline,
go fuck around with the Undertaker's
girl.
wife. There's no
No, no,
way.
no, 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 no. I read this and nearly passed out. Again, this is alleged. This has never been confirmed. This has never been even discussed. But I've read a few multiple sources that Michelle McCool divorced her first husband in 2006. She ends up secretly dating The Undertaker in 2007 in the spring. So I think it was like mid 2006, she gets a divorce from her first husband, but there was already, again, all alleged, but there were rumors of infidelity at that point, regardless, with
Wow.
Michelle. Again, love Michelle McCool. I'm not trying to like dig up any dirt, whatever. This is 10 years, 15 years ago. She and Undertaker fell in love when actually they were touring Europe and she got sick on tour, like very ill in
Mm-hmm.
Ireland, and Undertaker took care of her. And they
Aw.
almost had like a Nancy or a Florence Nightingale effect, which
Aw.
then they started secretly dating after that, the image of Undertaker, again, a moment of levity, the image of Undertaker being a nurse to a
Is
sick
yeah.
WWE superstar is so cute.
Oh my God.
And they've been together pretty much
Ever
ever
since,
since.
yeah.
So there was rumors that Michelle McCool and Chris were having kind of an affair in between those two things. So her
Gotcha.
divorce and her dating Undertaker, because she is specifically mentioned by name in the text messages between Nancy and Chris.
Oh, got it.
That is why there is such severe speculation that it's her because she was specifically mentioned by name. Again, that's an accusation.
Right.
But Pam says Nancy told her she had gone to an event where they both were, and everyone in the locker room was being super weird with Nancy as if they knew something she didn't.
Oh, no.
So crazy. Nancy told Pam she found a second cell phone of Chris's where he was texting, calling unknown
Um,
numbers. He started taking phone calls outside, far away from the house, which he'd never done, which is why she believed they were having an affair. She also says, um, that Chris was physically abusive to her. She was planning on leaving him, quote unquote, sooner rather than later. Um, and that she had kept evidence of her husband's abuse because, quote, if something ever happens to me, I want everyone to know it was Chris.
wow.
Evidence of this was never found. I did tell Xavier before, I didn't know if you were going to have time to talk about this, but I did tell Xavier before that Sandra, or no, the police did find evidence that Nancy had kept records of all the abuse Kevin had inflicted on her with dates, why
Mm,
they fought, what happened, whatever. She kept a very detailed notebook of that abuse for some reason. Police did find that, but she was passed, so they didn't really pursue anything, which is why Kevin can deny it to this day, I guess, whatever. But also the day before the murder, there's a record of Nancy visiting Dr. Aston, who was at the time prescribing her medications because she was having a hard time coping. And she had asked him questions about raising Daniel alone if she were to leave Chris.
gotcha.
So there's speculation that based on this phone call, based on her discussion with Dr. Aston, that she
Was getting ready to
confronted,
leave.
yes, and that she confronted Chris the following
Oh
night
my God.
about leaving and he snapped.
Lost it. Wow.
Yes. Again, this is all
Speculation. Right.
speculation, but that is a very workable theory to a lot of people.
Right.
Because again, everyone's like, don't really understand what was the reason that really pushed it. But
Yeah. I mean,
it, yeah,
there you go. I
there
mean,
you go.
it in my mind it tracks, but again, like we're piecing it together from, bits and
Yeah,
bobs all over the place. So it's
right. And again, like I said, the evidence that she was saying, like she kept a detailed like documents of the abuse she like dealt with Chris was never found. Like, and
I wonder why that
obviously,
is.
yeah, we'll never know. And again, it's weird because like I don't think Sandra has a reason to withhold it. And she moved into the house, discovered a lot of things, like we said. I don't know why the police would withhold it. Really scary stuff. I'm
I
really not
don't
sure.
I wonder if Chris found it or
Oh.
He could have found it. She could have like used it in the argument, like and or like he could have came across it after the fact and got rid of it.
Ooh.
I don't know. There's like, I mean,
Wow.
if it's weird that she would have a log for
Of
her
Kevin.
former husband, but not also, but like claim to have one for this husband and have it not be found somewhere. I think
That's a
that's,
good point. I didn't even think of that.
you know what I
Because,
mean? I think it's
yeah,
weird that her ex's was there, but like her current husband, who she's already had separations from, so it's like she already has priors of doing this like exercise of like like making a paper trail of abuse. So like if she already it is in the practice of, it doesn't make sense that like it just wouldn't be somewhere,
mm, that is, wow. I didn't
right?
think of that.
Mm-hmm.
Especially if, wow. Ooh.
Right,
Especially
because
if he kills her Friday and he doesn't kill her himself till Sunday.
Sunday he's got days to
Oh my God.
do what, and we don't know. I mean, he could have had a fireplace. I don't know.
Wow. Again, we will
We
never
will
know,
never
which is
know.
really crazy. But yeah, there's a lot of again, all of this stuff I found on the internet. Anyone could find this. It's the age of information. So this is all speculation, though the doctor's records are pretty clear, even though
Right.
he is a psychopath who knowingly prescribed wrestlers lots of drugs that ended up killing them. But and the phone call, again, don't think Pam has any reason to lie, but
Again.
take it all with a grain of salt. You never know.
Hmm.
So now, even based on this information, let's talk about Chris Nowinski, who is a former WWE superstar who now runs the Concussion Legacy Foundation. He is now a neuroscientist, which I loved this man.
He's
I
he
think
was he was a Harvard graduate before he came to the WWE. They it was like part of his character was that like he was like this pompous like Ivy League whatever. Like he wore around like a Letterman's jacket. It was a whole thing.
wow.
But he was, he's very highly educated. So um so yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
so
So
I
that's kind of the background on Christopher Nowinski. He's a neuroscientist now.
yeah, love. Um, but he basically, because of his concussions, his career is ended very
Short.
prematurely, in
Yeah.
his opinion. And he starts doing research about it, which ends up being a book. And it's mostly about chronic traumatic encephalopathy.
Yeah.
I hope I said that
CTE.
correctly. CTE, and it is a progressive degenerative brain disease that appears to be started from hits to the head. Um, he said he was doing research for his book and he discovered there were four cases of it from NFL players. Two of them had killed themselves, and one started hearing voices to the point where his death was literally a fiery police car chase where he ended
Right.
up crashing his car on like the opposite side of the road, like very, very dark stuff.
Hmm.
This was really chilling. Chris Nowinski had a conversation with Chris about 6 months prior to the incident in a locker room where Chris Benoit had asked him about his book about concussions, like the research he was doing, and he said, "I'm interested in what you're studying. Call me next week. Like I want to discuss this because I've had more concussions than I can
Can
count. Like
remember.
I
Yeah.
literally am not even sure how many I've had." And when Chris Nowinski called him, he said it sounded like he was in the middle of an argument with his wife.
Yeah.
And Chris Benoit said, this isn't a good time, call me some other time.
Hmm.
And then after the incident took place, Chris is like, well, I really wanted to see if this could have been a cause. I was hearing all these reports of he was exhibiting odd behaviors, paranoia, outbursts, like, and I just was curious and I decided what's the harm in reaching out to the family. And like we said before, Chris's father answered on the second ring.
Right.
He was, I think, very desperate for any sort of explanation of how his son could have done this. And they get Chris Benoit's brain, about a month after the incident. And the findings are really insane. He's not only positive for CTE, but it is incredibly severe to
Hmm.
the point where it appears that his brain was literally in an active state of rot
Right.
while he was alive,
Yeah.
which is just like beyond comprehension to me. Like I
It's
can't imagine that.
right. It's like you can injure your brain enough times that it just becomes like there is no stopping the
Degeneration.
right. Yeah, it just keeps going. So knowing what we know about like one, Chris's finishing maneuver
Mm-hmm.
and just the nature of the WWE back then, um, they were getting hit in the head all of the time.
All of the
All of the
time.
time.
They did a montage of chair shots,
Oh, then
and
that's doesn't even
I
scratch the surface.
the oh God, I just gotta chill again. The resounding
Thud.
sound is chilling.
And
And
like
I
the
don't even
way
like it without having this information. I didn't like it, and
right.
now it's like,
And Chris Jericho like describes it. He's like it was like a badge of honor, like to like take
yeah,
these shots. So, like he's like you would literally just like sit there and like just tense up as hard as you can, like get your shoulders like up and just take it. And like that is crazy because it becomes then now it's like this like weird boys club thing where they're
hmm,
all just like wailing on each other with just little regard for each other's safety.
yeah, really crazy. And I think, and the way, so we're like Chris Jericho's talking about taking headshots as a badge of honor, the chair shots. And then I think Chavo says it best because I felt it. Like I felt the fear, like before he verbalized it, where he's like, it makes me afraid and wonder, like, I obviously must have CTE. And like, at what stage is it at? Is this going to be the end for me? And I was looking at Chris Jericho and looking at Chavo and looking at all of the wrestlers at this time. And like, I can't imagine the fear like I would feel in my body, like
Right.
wondering about my brain,
Mm-hmm.
especially in the wake of this incident and being like, is this, this was a person who I knew and was my friend and I believed I did not believe capable of this. Like, does that mean like I could be capable of this like one day?
Right.
Like, I don't know. Like, that would haunt me a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that would be really scary for me.
Yeah, and it's like it goes like people typically like enter into the wrestling business when they're, young and your body can handle it. But
Right.
y- along with that youth is this like tends to be a sense of like invincibility and like
Yes.
I'm different. Like you know what I mean?
Mm,
Where like
mm-hmm.
you do that long enough until you're just like now you're just in the world, nothing has happened, so you just keep going.
Yeah,
Um
it's so true.
yeah, it's there I think that plays a part into it. And then I think another big part of it is it is very much like a um for lack of a better term, like a boys club, like a boys social club. Like they
Mm-hmm.
all feed in on each other's like um
Like
whatever it is.
machismo.
But yeah, it's like machismo. They like rag on insecurities. They're just like that is just their world, and they live in their world, and like that is it. And like it's hard to see the realities of that outside. Like it's just so
Yeah.
hard to like remove yourself because it is such a like like frantic, ceaseless life that like I don't even know if they have the time to like stop and worry. You know what I mean? About what
This
could
is
be the
true.
case. I think they just have to keep going
Look,
because like
yes.
it's great. Like they get to a town, they have maybe a couple of hours, they have to do a show, they have to leave the town to get to the next one, and like that's their life. So I
Hmm.
don't think
Processes.
I don't think they're even able to process any of it.
Mm. That's a good point. I was even thinking that when they were saying like Chris was supposed to get on like an afternoon flight and then Chav was gonna pick him up at the airport and drive him directly to the arena to wrestle. I was like,
Right.
like just bing 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 bing, bing. Like it's nonstop. So yeah,
Hmm.
that's a really good point. And like even from the perspective, like through the lens of like grief. Like, how are you really
You're
processing
not
grief?
you're not.
You're
You're
not
just
processing anything. You're not even processing your last meal. Like, I don't
right.
even like
And
it's
like there are like
beyond.
and even if you talk about like the flip side of it, like um John Cena has said this, like The Rock has said, like Stone Cold. It's just like it's because of the nature of like the lifestyle and how it's so like go like you can't even like appreciate like all of the good that goes along with it also because you're just
Mm,
like going like they
wow.
always say like you look at like your wrestling career like at the other end of it like you look at it in like hindsight like because it happens so fast
Wow.
um and that's why like I feel like a lot of wrestlers have a hard time when it ends or
Because they're
like
like, what just
deciding an
happened?
end is like how do you like when your life is forever your body will obviously can't do that forever so they have to at some point like find a line but when you're just like so accustomed to the highs and lows of the road it's that is a hard line to draw for yourself
Yeah. Oh, yeah, of course.
so
Especially when it's the only thing you do. Like
right
it's not like you have other hobbies. Like that's
you
it. Like that's
can't like
what
there
you
is no
do.
yeah like
Wow, I didn't think of that too. Like just like you don't even enjoy the moments of good.
you're just
Because
going
it's like, oh God, that's crazy.
unless you're extraordinarily great at
Present.
being present
Yeah,
yeah
which who is, seriously? Like not I, but this, speaking of even just like the passage of time, like so Randazzo, again, the author of Ring of Hell, talks about, it's this crazy thing with head injuries and just like legacies and passing of the torch. Harley Race invents the flying headbutt. He tells everyone, don't do this move. It fucks up your spine horribly. It ruins your ability to have an old age. Dynamite Kid hears this from Harley Race, does it his whole career, ends up in a wheelchair. Dynamite Kid tells Chris Benoit he does it his whole career, loses his mind.
yeah
And I like I I don't even have the words. Like it really is so crazy how it's just like you said, it's this invincibility thing. Like again, there's multiple causality, all different perspectives, but like it makes me think of what you just said, that invincibility thing where it's like, okay, well, he did it and ended up in a wheelchair, but when I do it, it's
right
just cool. It's just cool as
right
shit.
hmm
Like it's the coolest finisher. It's what separates me. It's like
right it
this thing.
yeah and like you get to a point or at least like it was described the way that Chris like approached wrestling and is that like he was going to do whatever he was like this was his whole life this is the only job
Yeah.
he's ever had this is the only thing he's ever wanted he was going to do whatever and if it meant like putting this like ridiculously dangerous move like in your arsenal like okay it is the
Mm-hmm.
means to the end
Right.
so
Yeah, and Randazzo also says, no matter what happened that weekend, just based on what Chris put his body through, his story was going to have a tragic end, like
yeah
regardless.
hmm
And it's interesting because I also found this I found this in my search that the autopsy also revealed that all of Chris Benoit's organs were extremely enlarged, especially his heart was extremely enlarged just from the drug abuse. And the medical examiner told Sandra confidentially that even if this had never happened, he would have been dead within 10 months.
yeah
Like he would have just
gone into
dropped
like
dead.
organ failure yeah
Yes, like he would have the same way Eddie Guerrero just dropped dead.
right
So again, story would have had a tragic end, but it didn't need to be this.
right
So again, there's all the speculation of, was it the head trauma? Was it the testosterone? Was it the grief? It was probably a crazy mix of all of it.
hmm
But JR says it led to really intense institutional changes where we have to protect the athlete.
yeah
And to me, this just makes sense, obviously, because the athlete is also your meal ticket. So protecting them at all costs just seems like the
yeah
obvious
and
choice.
there are like very much so like just in terms of like rule like there in the W there's no longer like unprotected headshots If
Mm-hmm.
you watch the WWE product today, like all the chair shots happen in like the body
Mm-hmm.
area,
Shoulder, yeah.
shoulder, back, for what like, but the head is protected. There is just a much more prominent medical presence,
Mm.
just generally. Oh, like they are now just kind of like more likely to stop matches for concussions, for just things that come up that 10 years ago they were not stopping matches for.
Mm.
Um, so there are things like in place that have changed. And they had to. There was no way that the WWFE was going to be able to like continue to operate in the same capacity with this being so heavily spotlighted.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. And I don't I wish this wasn't the reason they did it, but I'm glad that they did it.
Right. I agree.
Yeah. Yeah.
As horrible as all of this was, the things that got implemented make wrestling safer for the people that now work there.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. So, like I said, there's a lot of speculation about still to this day about the cause, why, the
mhm,
reason. Chavo and David really affirm that they think it was the CTE, the brain damage that wasn't even him. Just
right.
he would have never done
And to
that.
me, like as far as like David goes, that really like makes sense.
Of course.
I think
Of
to
course.
be able to like carry on in his life, like he has to kind of be like that was somebody else. That was
Of
not my father was not in his right mind,
right.
right? And I think that makes sense. Like,
Of course. And I'm not going to take that from him, to be
no,
honest.
absolutely not. And nor,
And
not that
not my place
not our
too.
place, not our yeah.
Hmm.
So,
Yes. And I honestly could see the same for Chavo because how close he was after a year after losing, basically his older brother. I
and
could
being the
see
one
how
to
he
find
could,
it, like, right,
yes, I could see how he could also mentally put himself in that place. Sandra, however, it's obvious from her reaction about CTE that she doesn't really believe it.
right.
So she's saying like I think it was a lot of things. It was the grief, it was the
Hmm.
the drugs, it was possibly CTE. She literally like rolls her eyes.
Yeah, and I
Um,
think that is to like maintain the relationship she has with David, and
Absolutely.
you know what I mean. I
Absolutely.
think to again, like she said it like earlier, she's like out of the respect for like the kids that he has, like I don't think she's gonna go out of her way to pile on to, David's grief or change the however he has come to accept his grief. Um, so I think to kind of like just for the sake of that relationship, she's just kind of like it could be, you know what I mean? Like she's not gonna like
Maybe.
just be
We'll
like,
never really know. Yeah.
right,
And when I was listening to the podcast episode she was on today, it was or from 2016, I was listening to it today, but she says, listen, maybe it was CTE. I don't really know, but I'll just say that I don't believe so because I was with them almost every single day, almost up until the day it happened. I was there immediately following, and just based on what I saw, that was still him. He was still making cognitive choices. He knew who he was. There was a lot of things in the house that led me to believe he was still in his right frame of mind, like that he knew what he was doing because they basically, I guess, said that his brain was so damaged it's like he had early onset Alzheimer's, and she was like, no, like he knew who he was,
mm-hmm.
he knew who his family was, he knew what he was doing, and I just like don't
I
believe
don't buy
that.
it. Yeah,
I don't buy it. That's her choice. And I think, like you said, how she will be like, maybe it's possibly CTE to protect her relationship with David. I think conversely, David also kind of does the same thing where he's not going to be like, yes, it was. Like,
right,
I think they've both accepted that their grief is so similar but very unique
right,
that it's not their job to tell the other one how to feel about it, but they can find comfort in each other. Like,
right, for
and so
having for having to have to go through it, you know?
Yeah, and the cause doesn't change the effect, to be
Correct.
honest. So the outcome is still the same regardless of how they feel. So I think they've gotten to this place that's like it doesn't even not that it doesn't matter, but it's like we still have to keep living, and so we don't have to get into the nuance of how you feel, how I feel, how it's different, whatever.
Right.
Let's
And
just get
especially
through
because
this.
like at the end of the day, like we'll never have the
Exactly.
answer, you know?
Exactly.
So it's like you could spend your whole life and your sanity like trying to boil that down or try to figure out or come to an answer, or you can just be like, okay, like we can, like we both experience this. We have to figure out a way to move forward.
Yes. And there is the discussion, like we said, about whether or not Chris belongs in the Hall of Fame. You already know our feelings, we already said. So, but I do think it is interesting they bring up the idea of Nancy being in the Hall of Fame, which I fully agree with,
I
and I
agree.
think is really, and even David says this, Nancy deserves the recognition she never gets because her reputation was also erased because of Chris. Because, like I said, I think people were like, you see Nancy, you're going to associate her with what happened. But
She was an individual performer in her own right.
absolutely.
Yes, she got associated with Chris like through a storyline. Um, and yeah, obviously their marriage, but
Hmm.
at the end of the day, there are people in the Hall of Fame who have done less than she has had done.
Yeah.
And I think they said it like best, where it's like she should be remembered for like what she did, not what was done to her. And
Yes.
and
Exactly.
and like it's I 100% agree. Like she was one of the best like valet managers like to do it. So
Hmm.
and that's like you can put her against anybody and like she holds up.
Hmm.
So like the real like not like another just like tragedy of it all is that this whole section of her life is just kind of like also going to be forgotten because of something that was completely out of her control.
Absolutely.
And it's like it's bad enough that her life was taken, out of her control.
Hmm.
But now like it just feels like her memory has also been taken, like, and
Hmm.
that's a tough pill to swallow because it's just
Yes.
like she did nothing wrong, and like it
Right.
just feels like she also like got blamed for this.
Right. Fully. And I agree too, because it's not like we're exalting her because she's a tragic figure. We're exalting her because she was a badass. Like woman was so amazing and so ahead of its time. We've already talked about it, but and I also think like to start breaking that association for people to remember what
Her,
a formative figure she was, to exalt her,
I
because we
agree.
just know her as it's like she was in the Benoit incident, the Chris Benoit incident. And it's like we need to exalt her for her life instead of how she died. And I understand why putting Chris in there should not happen,
Right.
but I agree. Like I think Nancy is more than a good enough candidate for the Hall of Fame, like
I
without a doubt.
agree.
And I think it should rewrite the way that people look at her.
I agree. No,
So,
fully, because it's just like, why are we going to let him define her forever? Like
yes.
it's for what? Like
Yeah.
it just degrades her, her contributions, her life. Like it just she was her own person. Like
Hmm.
she was not just, the woman that got murdered by Chris Benoit. Like she had a life. Like
Hmm.
I don't know. That
Yeah.
bothers me.
Me too. It bothers apparently everyone, at least everyone that was on this episode. But
Right.
uh so it goes on to kind of talk about how the episode kind of ends with Sandra and David having this like reuniting moment. And so we learn at the very end that they have not spoken to each other in 13 years.
Hmm.
So basically, they have not spoken to each other since before the incident happened. And Sandra says it was made clear to her that the children, meaning David and Megan, wanted nothing to do with her family, and those kids were told the same. She and Sandra says, I will not say by who, but the short version is it was not true.
Yeah.
Like they were told this lie by whomever. And so they never spoke after the incident, which is really crazy. Imagine the last time you spoke to this person, you have no idea how they feel, this person you were so close with.
Mm-hmm.
And the last time you spoke was before this happened, and you never speak to them, and you never know how they feel about you, about what happened, about literally anything
Right.
until 13 years later. And Chris Jericho apparently is the one that reunites them,
Right.
like gets them together for Dark Side of the Ring. They might have gotten together before that, but at the time,
They
Chris,
got together for a show that an
yes,
AEW show that Chris Jericho was like performing like at. That was their
yeah.
their like first like reunion.
But I guess like Chris had both of their numbers and
Mm-hmm.
basically was like, can I give Sandra your number? Can I give David your number? And like they swap numbers, and Sandra, I guess, is finally the one that calls and is
Mm-hmm.
like, let's, and they talk for like 2 hours, is this whole thing, and then they reunite to watch a wrestling match. I did look into this, like I said I would last week. David is kind of an aspiring wrestler. I couldn't find too much information about it,
Mm-hmm.
but the general consensus um is that because he, like you said, because he wants to use his name, because he also wants to do a specific move his father used to do,
The
most
headbutt.
organizations, I
Is it
don't
the
know if
headbutt
it's, it might be. I don't think it
or
is
the
though.
crossface?
I think it's that. I think it's that. Most wrestling organizations will not associate with him because they don't even want to like open that can of worms.
Yeah.
But I did read some comments on an Instagram post. So again, I really went down some rabbit holes. And let us know if you guys agree or disagree. Like a lot of people are like, just let him wrestle. I understand not wanting him to do like a move his father did, to not want these, but the association is going to happen regardless, in my opinion.
If you just look at him.
If you just look at him, it's crazy. And again, I don't think he should be punished for what his father did.
Agreed.
I understand, unfortunately, from a business standpoint, like why they don't even want to go near that. But again, it's unfortunate that he should have to suffer
Even more
and
so.
even
Like,
more so lose his childhood dream, because we know it was his childhood dream to be a wrestler because of what his father did, and he is innocent in all of this. So I'm not sure how that's going to pan out. Like Xavier said, he's around our age, so a little bit older, right? Like I mean, we're 30.
right. I
So,
mean, a lot of them have usually started before that point, but it's like
yeah.
I don't know how like if he's been training or it's not like he clearly knows wrestlers. So like I don't know. I don't know like
Yeah.
where he's at with that. I just like I it's just like it just makes me sad that like they continue to punish the family like to this day, you know?
Yeah. And the comments, like again, like I said, generally positive. Like I don't know why we blackballed this family for no reason. So
Right.
let us know what you guys think. But yeah, so the episode kind of ends with more about like the family dynamic. Like, they don't mention, which I loved. I love that they actually kind of did this. Sandra, it actually ends with Sandra saying, the producer's like, do you think you'll ever forgive Chris? And she goes, I would love to forgive him, to be honest with you, because carrying around the burden of hate is exhausting.
Yeah.
And maybe she goes, maybe I will forgive him. Maybe it'll be tomorrow, but it's not today.
Yeah.
And the episode just ends.
And and it's like and totally valid. 100%.
Completely. Oh my God, completely.
No one gets to tell that woman when or if or if
Or if,
she gives that man forgiveness. And
and that's
that's
fair,
more
beyond
than.
fair. And I honestly, I give her a lot of credit for even saying that. And I really do, because I can't even begin to parse
No,
the
I
deep, deep dark of that in your mind.
like
So,
and like how much strength that must have taken to say. And
yep.
you know what I mean? It just
Hmm.
like the resolution to like to say that and like it or at least I felt like she genuinely meant it. And like where it's just like yeah, I would like to not hate this person.
Hmm.
Um Just and I think she says it like correctly in that it's just like for no other reason other than to lift this off of myself.
That part.
And which is what, which was I resonate with a lot because it's just like and what we're talking about now is like no one can tell her when, no one can tell
Hmm.
her if,
Hmm.
no one can tell her anything as far as I'm concerned.
Hmm.
Um, but like to have the strength to be like, I want to forgive this person. Just even that notion is like I
Hmm.
want to
Hmm.
is is telling in a lot of ways of the kind of person that she is.
Absolutely. And saying that in the same interview where she says, I think about if I had like I think about if I had like stopped Nancy from seeing him, like how
Right.
things would be.
Every
She's
day.
also thinking every day about how she could have saved her sister. And in the same interview is saying, but I want to forgive him.
Right.
She is so amazing to me.
Hmm.
And I think it's also telling that she doesn't really speak about this ever.
Yeah.
Like there's only she did the podcast with Chris Jericho in 2016. There was apparently one other like minor interview, and she was and it wasn't even an interview. It was actually I was talking to a friend, and she happened to write a wrestling blog and kind of just like put our conversation on the internet. Crazy.
Hmm.
And then this.
Which was
So
also produced by Chris Jer. Like, you know
Chris
what I mean?
Jericho,
Like these
yes.
are like she well, I think she plays it close to the vest, obviously. I think like
Uh-huh.
that is a very raw wound that will probably remain that way for the rest of her life. So it makes sense that that's how she kind of like approaches it.
Of
Um,
course.
but like at the moment where like there's one point in the Dark Side episode where like David like loses it, like he's describing this like weekend he had with Nancy and Daniel and like how they're having fun, taking pictures, like all this stuff. He like loses it. And she goes to like console him and like the mic picks up first like the mic just picks up like him like first of all he just like one long like sighing just like fuck like I like and she just comes over and she's just like it's good for us. Like we
Mm,
can't just like hold on to this forever. It's good to say how we feel, to get it you, to like take this internal pain and externalize it in some capacity. Like that is
mm.
healthy. Because it's been 13 years or whatever at the time of that they
At
do
the
it.
time it was 13, yeah.
So
I I think that's such a good point. I think it's a testament to like grief is not linear
no.
by any means.
Hmm.
It can still take you someplace 13 years later.
Right.
I and the fact that again, you don't go through the stages of grief in order. You will
No.
flip-flop between all of them 7,000 times. Um But yeah, I also think it's telling that she trusts this story with other wrestlers.
Hmm.
Like, it's not like she went to CNN. It's not like she went to
Right.
60 Minutes. It's not like she went somewhere else with this information. She went to the people that she trusted. And it's hysterical because even she was saying, I was never even into wrestling. In this podcast I was listening to, she's like, I wasn't even into wrestling. I used to read books at Nancy's matches. Like, I just went there because they're my family. But
Right.
like she trusts these people to tell the accurate full story of like again Chris was who he was and he also was who he was and did
Right.
what he did. And I again I just think like that is also of course it's interesting the same way that Chris went to wrestling to try and remove himself from the grief of Eddie even though he was confronted with it there. It's interesting that she also takes her grief to wrestling.
Right.
Like it's a weird kind of full circle-y
Kind of moment.
moment.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I they did not talk about, which I was actually fine with. They didn't talk about the lawsuits, the trials, like any there wasn't really a trial, but like the lawsuits that came with this.
Mm,
I liked that they focused more on like just what happened and the people affected by it.
right.
And of course, outside people were mentioned, the media and how it was a circus because you have to. I liked that it ended that way. If anyone is curious, I looked into it a little bit. There was a potential looming congressional investigation immediately following the incident. But because the WWE tightened up their wellness program, and the hysteria surrounding the Benoit murders had subsided, literally the direct quote is Congress lost interest. They didn't care anymore. Like since the circus was over, they kind of were like, okay, whatever. And I
Okay.
guess they had done like a check on the new wellness program, like protocols and stuff, and were like satisfied.
Hmm.
And then about 10 years later, there was a potential lawsuit, which we kind of alluded to when we talked about the steroid trials with McDevitt, whatever, however you
McDivitt,
pronounce his
yeah.
name. Um, this was in 2016, directly around or right after the time that the NFL football players had come forward suing the organization for lack of care about concussions. And McDevitt, there's an article that I read from with a statement of his that basically said the lawsuit was thrown out. I think like 67 wrestlers came forward, all
Jeez.
retired. Yeah, like a lot. I think it was that. I could be wrong. But it was a big number of wrestlers that were all retired came forward, I think including Mark Miro, and said that, basically McDevitt said that um the paperwork was basically identical to the NFL one, just with the like NFL was changed to WWE or like whatever. And he goes, so
Gotcha.
it was easy to throw it out because it looked just like a cash grab. Like
Gotcha.
the NFL had players had success with it. We might also, again, this is alleged.
Right.
I don't think they were correct in handling the care of the athletes, but they specifically bring up Benoit because of what happened and the CTE and everything. But it was 10 years after the incident. Most of these wrestlers were allegedly retired before the Benoit incident even happened. Like, so it
Hmm.
really just didn't have any legs to stand on. Again, that's the information I was able to find out about it. If anyone has any other information, let us know. But I was fine that they didn't even mention it or talk
Right.
about it. It felt, you know, it didn't feel in the vein of what the episode was meant to be about. So, but in case anyone's interested, that's all I got.
All right.
Whoa.
So that was the Chris Benoit saga,
Yeah.
controversy, life, and times.
If you're
Yeah.
still here, thanks.
Yeah, honestly, this might I might be honest, this might be 2 episodes. We'll see.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean,
Um but yeah, in which case, I want to thank you guys for taking the time out of your day to listen to the New to Wrestling podcast after dark. Next thing you're gonna see from us is another just regular episode of the New to Wrestling podcast. We are on the road to WrestleMania 13 in 1997. So we got lots of moving parts there. We have your Bret Harts, your Stone Colds, your Undertaker, your Psycho Sids.
mm,
So
hmm
yeah, there's lots more lighter topics going on over there. And in our next episode, this one honestly might be 2 episodes, so we'll see. But in the next topic in After Dark, I'm going to throw out we're gonna watch the first. Oh yeah, Kelsey doesn't know. I'm telling her now.
Woo!
The first episode of the Monday Night Wars. It's on Peacock. It's a documentary series, basically detailing the um just the saga that was the Monday Night Wars between WCW Nitro and Monday Night Raw.
Okay,
Um,
hot.
so we're gonna watch the first two. Um, will be the next couple episodes. After that, we start getting into things that cross over into our timeline, so we won't go there, but we will
Okay,
watch the first two so that we can kind of give Kelsey a better baseline understanding of what's going on between these two companies.
very
Because they're
cool.
happening simultaneously, and it's hard to cover all of the bases of what's happening in both companies on one podcast.
Work. This is true.
So
Great.
thank you guys so much for listening. We appreciate it, and we will catch you next time.
We'll see you there.
Bye.
Bye.